Hi guys, thank you for clicking on this video. My name's Aisha and this is Aisha's Crime Tales. So today we are going to be talking about quite a tragic tale of a loving couple that made the ultimate sacrifice. Now I'm just going to give you a quick trigger warning. We are going to be talking about euthanasia and attempted suicide. So I'm just going to give you a quick overview of the story before I actually go into the nitty-gritties of it. Now, back in December 2021, Mr. David Hunter, who was 75 at the time, took the life of his wife, Miss Janice Hunter, who was 74, in their home in Paphos, Cyprus. This happened after weeks of Janice basically begging him to end her suffering. David then went on to attempt to take his own life, which was unsuccessful. He was then arrested and put into prison. Then when his trial came up, he was facing premeditated murder charges, but at the trial, the charges got dropped down to manslaughter and he was actually released from prison the same day as his trial. But then, following this, at the very last moment, the Cyprus Attorney General appealed the decision to free David and is now trying to get him put back in prison and charged with premeditated, which would carry a full life sentence. So there's actually quite a bit of information with this story. I'm going to start right at the very beginning. So David and Janice, they were high school sweethearts. They met at a miners' dance in Ashington, Northumberland in the UK, which was their hometown. When David first set his eyes on Janice, he was absolutely besotted with her. He thought that she was the most beautiful girl in the world, and he instantly knew that she was the one for him. From the moment that they met, he never even looked at another woman. He only had eyes for Janice. Their daughter, Leslie Hawthorne, who is their only child, said that they laughed together, they always had something to say to one another, and they never left each other's side. She described her family home as being a place of warmth and a place of joy. From the age of 15, David spent his entire life working down the mines, and Janice, she worked in the corner shop, and then obviously she was the homemaker and she looked after the kids and looked after the home. David and Janice, they seemed like the perfect couple. For 57 years, they doted on each other. They were a rarity. They were a couple so constant, so committed, that would never tire of each other's company. They were, honestly, like the perfect couple. Everybody that knew the family would speak of them really highly. They said that David was a smashing bloke and that they were both just wonderful people. David spent the best part of 40 years working down the mines. Then in 1999, when he managed to retire, they bought a villa in Trimithausa, I think is how it's pronounced. I could be completely wrong there, but it's right next to the coastal resort of Paphos in Cyprus. Then 2 years later, in 2001, they then moved there permanently. David and Janice absolutely loved Cyprus. They'd been there before. It had always been their dream to go and retire there and to spend the last of their days in Cyprus, a place that they absolutely adored. At first, they tried to get out as much as they possibly could. They'd go for long drives, they'd go to restaurants, but unfortunately, quite quickly, Janice became very sick, and then it was just one thing after the other, after the other, after the other. She developed rheumatoid arthritis. She then had to have a growth from one of her ovaries removed. She had an appendectomy, then she had a double knee replacement, and then she fell and shattered her collarbone. And this was all before she even got any kind of terminal diagnosis. Leslie, who now works as a compliance consultant for the financial district, said, "I didn't really know how bad things were. My dad has since told me she was in a lot of pain. She had rheumatoid arthritis, which caused a lot of pain and affected her mobility. She had cataracts. She had a growth on her ovaries removed. She had knee replacement surgery. She had skin cancer on her hands and face. She was in very bad health. It was kind of one thing after the other." And then in 2015, David suffered a stroke, but with typical determination, he very quickly recovered. And David had once said, I didn't come here to live my dream and spend my days drooling in a chair. And I mean, fair play to him. He has suffered a stroke and he kept going. But then with all of the medical bills piling up, everything just started to get on top of them. David and Janice then made the decision to sell their villa and they bought a more modest maisonette instead. And this was because they needed to release the capital from their home just to be able to pay their medical bills. Then in 2016, their troubles just worsened again, and Janice was diagnosed with a really rare form of blood cancer that, I'm sorry, I cannot even pronounce. Janice's sister Kathleen had passed away from leukemia in 1987, and Janice watched her go through the chemo process and saw just how grueling that process was. She then decided that that just wasn't for her. She wasn't going to go through that, and she did know what the consequences of that would be, and that, you know, she would lose her life, but that was her decision, and that was the decision that she made. Janice was then mostly housebound for the last 3 years of her life as her condition just steadily deteriorated and deteriorated. She was quickly becoming less and less able to look after herself, and she was really rapidly losing weight. Then when COVID hit Cyprus and all the restrictions were put in place, everything just worsened for them once again, because they were now isolated away from the community, away from their friends and family, and even worse, they had then been isolated away from receiving proper medical care. So Janice was not actually getting the care that she needed. Janice had no proper medication. She was relying on only paracetamol, which obviously did absolutely nothing for the kind of pain that she was in. Dealing with that amount of pain really took its toll on Janice's mental health, but David, he did absolutely everything he could. He stood by her and he took care of her every single step of the way. Neighbours have said that caring for Janice, it never bothered him. He just carried on. He just loved her to bits. Despite this huge string of medical problems, David has still said that he spent the best 16 years of his life in retirement with his wife in Cyprus. Leslie explained, "Dad told me my mum had been in constant agonising pain in the weeks before her death. She had continual diarrhoea, and Dad would make her nappies out of towels and lift her into the shower to wash her. She was mortified. She felt she'd lost all her dignity. She only had paracetamol, and that didn't even touch the sides of her pain. The last week of her life was terrible. She had horrendous nosebleeds, her sight was going, she couldn't eat or drink, and though exhausted, she couldn't sleep. Dad couldn't get her upstairs to bed, so they lay in the reclining chairs downstairs all night. He held her hand." One of the hunters' former neighbours, Mr. Kesting, said that the hunters had always been really good and really kind to them when they moved to Tremorthalsa in 2019. Mr. Kesting said, "We became friendly with them. If someone was going shopping, we asked the other party if they needed something, and when I had to go to Germany for medical treatment, David brought me up to the airport and picked me up. For the first half of 2020, she was optimistic, and David was very keen to enjoy life. For example, he had a little open-top sports car and he drove her around. Very often they told us that they had visited her most loved fish restaurant and things like this. At the time, they were very active." Mr. Kesting said that he noticed a change in Janice when she stopped coming out on the balcony in the mornings when he would come out to let out his cat. This was a daily routine, but it changed in the last year dramatically. In the last half year, she didn't show on the balcony at all. COVID times was difficult for her. It was not easy for them to get the treatment they needed because of overall shortages in Cyprus. Dad tried everything to help her. The last half year, she was deteriorating in a brutal way. For me, she looked deathly ill. He said it was the most important thing to help her, but it's clear the situation for David was much more difficult. He had less and less contact with any person outside and just stayed with her more." And David said, "I felt so helpless that I couldn't do anything for her. For 5 to 6 weeks before she died, she was asking me to help her. She was asking me more and more every day. In the last week, she was crying and begging me. Every day, she asked me a bit more intensely to do it. The last week, she said, 'I can't go on. This life isn't for me. We just go to the hospital and stay home. I don't have any quality of life. I'm totally bored of this. I can't go on.' She started becoming hysterical, so I said, 'Yes, I will help you.'" He told the court, "I never intended to kill her. I hoped for 8 days that she would change her mind. She was laying down. She was suffering. I would do anything to help her. It was her decision that she wanted to die. Not mine, hers. She wasn't just my wife. She was my best friend. You haven't seen the strain of the last 6 years, what she's been through." David said that he doesn't actually remember much of the day that his wife died, but then, to be fair, trauma has quite a way of blocking out our memories, so I'm kind of not surprised that he doesn't remember much. He said that he'd gone to go and make a cup of coffee, and when he came back, she was inconsolable and begging him, so he agreed. He said that she was grateful and that she didn't struggle, and she went peacefully. On the 18th of December 2021, Janice Hunter died of asphyxiation. Following Janice's death, David took and he attempted to take his own life. He then FaceTimed his little brother, and he was asking his brother to please look after Leslie. His little brother then rang the police, who also got in touch with Leslie. It was just as everything was emerging from lockdown and everybody was getting ready for Christmas when Leslie received a call that would change her life forever. She recalls how that day unfolded by saying, "My daughter had just broken up from school and we'd gone out to do a pre-Christmas lunch. I'd switched off my mobile phone as we ate our meal. I wanted to set a good example. As we turned onto our street, I put it on again and it rang immediately. It was the police. They said, 'Can we come to your house? It's urgent.' There were two police cars, 4 officers. They came inside but wouldn't tell me what had happened. They said, 'We're trying to get in touch with your dad.' I was really confused. Then my phone rang. It was my uncle, Dad's younger brother, and he just said, 'Your mum is dead and your dad has tried to kill himself.' My dad had FaceTimed his little brother after taking a right old mix of blood pressure and pain medication, anything that he could get his hands on. He told him what had happened. He said, 'Goodbye, just look after Leslie.' My uncle was traumatized, convinced that Dad would die. He phoned the UK police, who contacted Interpol, and they swung into action. It was a very slick operation." Now, as Leslie was on the phone to her uncle, her dad was being rushed to the hospital in Paphos. Leslie said, "Your world just kind of goes out from underneath you. I howled like an animal. I remember saying, 'No, no, no, that can't be right.' I don't think I took anything in. I was sobbing, hysterical. The police were being very kind, but I just wanted them to go. That night I couldn't sleep. I barely slept since, and I lay there thinking, my mum is dead and I don't know if my dad is alive. I was out of my mind with grief." At around lunchtime the following day, Leslie received a call from the Foreign Office, and she was told that her father was clinging to life and was in intensive care. When she finally managed to talk to him, she was just telling him, "Daddy, Daddy, please don't leave me." And David told her, "I love you, I'm sorry, I just want to be with your mum. I want to die." David spent 4 days in intensive care before he was then transferred to a police cell in Paphos police station. But when Leslie found out that her dad had been transferred to a police cell, her heart was just filled with dread. She thought, this just can't be right. He's a suicide risk, like he'll himself. Leslie's fears were then mildly placated when she found out that he had been sectioned and sent to a psychiatric facility. Leslie explained, "The next time I spoke to him, he sounded less groggy but disorientated. He was saying he wanted to die, and I'd beg him to stay alive for me. Each day I spoke to him, he seemed to be coming out the fog a bit more, and he kept telling me how much he loved me." Leslie told the public just days after her father's arrest, "We have to bring him home. I think Mum and Dad made a pact. They just wanted to go together. Mum repeatedly made her wishes clear to Dad in the final 6 weeks of her life. She was, Dad has now told me, talking about it daily. To begin with, he tried to dissuade her. He then said he would go with her. He loved her so much. He has nightmares now where he can still hear her screaming in pain, and they had to deal with that on their own. I'm horrified they were so desperate that they thought dying together was the only way out. They always said they didn't want to burden me because I was their only child. Dad would say, 'You don't want to be lumbered with us.' They were very proud. They hid from me how terrified they were, and it breaks my heart that I didn't know they were in such despair. They were big ones for giving other people help, but not good at asking for it themselves. They belonged to that generation that would still go to work even if a leg dropped off. On New Year's Eve, David was moved from the psychiatric hospital back to the cells at Paphos police station, and then more setbacks and more disappointment was to follow. The prison authorities had initially told David that they were going to allow him to attend his wife's funeral, which was on January the 5th, but when that day came, they actually kept him locked in his cell. Leslie, who has a pathological fear of flying, couldn't face the trip over to actually go to her mum's funeral, which she actually arranged herself with the help of some of her mum's friends. The funeral was then followed by a 16-day silence. David didn't speak to Leslie in a while, and her fears were mounting. David had been charged with premeditated. He was moved from the cells in Paphos to the prison in Nicosia, and this is where he remained right up until his sentencing. Leslie was forbidden from contacting her dad when he was in prison, and he had no way of contacting her either. Leslie said, "I was frantic. Dad had said that hearing my voice was what was keeping him alive. What if he thought I'd broken off contact? I didn't know what to do." Help then came from a barrister named Mikhail Polak, who is the Director of Justice Abroad. He then took the case on from a Cypriot solicitor. This was an absolute game changer for David and Leslie. Mikhail spoke to the Cypriot High Commission and he sent a consul out to go and see David. 2 days later, Leslie received a call from her dad. While dealing with the awful ramifications of this double tragedy, Leslie took to crowdfunding to try and help fund the court case. The Crowd Justice fundraiser actually raised over £40,000 from over 1,300 pledges. The first brief caption says, "My name is Leslie and I'm fundraising for my dad, David, who is recently widowed, alone and frightened in a Cypriot prison." It then goes on to say, "My name is Leslie and I'm fundraising for my father, David Hunter, who is 74 and facing murder charges in Cyprus. My parents were together for 56 years and doted on each other. They were teenage sweethearts who couldn't bear to be apart. My father worked in the mines his whole life. The home that he shared with my mum was a place of warmth and joy. When they retired, they moved to Cyprus, a place that they both loved. Over the last 5 years, my mum became increasingly unwell. She was suffering with blood cancer and was in a great deal of pain, and her quality of life had drastically diminished. This was a terminal disease that had taken the life of her sister, and the pain she was under was getting worse and worse. She wanted to die and wanted for her suffering to be ended. When she died in their home in Paphos in December 2021, my dad was left stricken with grief and he tried to take his own life. Fortunately for us, he survived. He has been charged with premeditated murder of my mother. This carries an automatic life sentence. He is now in prison in Cyprus, bewildered and terrified and separated from his family and friends. My dad devoted himself to caring for my mum. We love him very much and we want to help him in any way possible. This is why we need help to pay for legal representation, which will give him the best chance possible of being allowed to return to the United Kingdom to the people who love him and can support him through his grief. My father is in the later stages of his life and we just want him to be with us." Leslie makes multiple updates on this page, but most of them are her thanking everyone for their support and basically explaining how crowd justice works. The Hunters were dependable, kind, hard-working people who centered themselves around the community that is now rallying together to come and support David. Leslie felt as though she was fighting the fight of her life. She explains, "I haven't even started to grieve for Mum yet. I can't, I'll dissolve. I have to keep fighting for Dad or I'll lose him as well. I keep talking to Mum saying, it's not that I've forgotten you. I'm just waiting for Dad to come home so we can grieve together. Dad is a good man. He doesn't deserve to die alone in a foreign prison. He is so lonely. After 56 years with Mum, it's like he's missing a limb. He's living with 12 other prisoners in a single room, sharing one lavatory. He's used to a spotless house, and the levels of hygiene trouble him. It's grim. He's done nothing but love Mum. He's a true gentleman. Some people have asked, how can you forgive him? But I just see his kindness and compassion. With the help of Justice Abroad, Leslie put in an appeal to try and have David's charge reduced to assisting. Mikhail Polak said, David is a model prisoner. However, at this stage in his life, he needs to be with his family in the UK, not jail abroad. So we're focusing on getting the charge reduced to assisting suicide so that he can serve a shorter sentence at home. This was the first and only euthanasia case that had ever been seen in Cyprus. So Mikhail Polak wrote a 14-page request drawing on case law from all around the world, arguing that David shouldn't be receiving a charge, but he received back a 2-paragraph response refusing the request, and they gave no reason. Mr. Polak expressed his surprise by saying, it is clear to anyone that looks at this case that this is not a case where murder is the most appropriate charge. It would be good if the Attorney General changed his mind with regards to changing the decision. If he's not going to do that, we'll fight the trial, and David's very determined to fight the case. He doesn't look at himself as a murderer. We don't think David deserves to be in jail for the rest of his life in Cyprus. He's a good man. He was with his wife for a very long time. They had a loving relationship for over 50 years. No one, even people in Cyprus I've spoken to, thinks he deserves to be on trial. This matter then went to court with David on trial for premeditated. Everyone that knew David was shocked. Not a single person believed that he should be on trial for, and he definitely doesn't deserve to spend the rest of his life in prison. The trial was heard by 3 judges, and David would have to stand up and recount everything that happened on that awful night. The defense, and basically anybody who could, was urging for the charge to be dropped from premeditated to manslaughter. Before the trial began, Leslie said, all I can say is I'm dreading it. I'm hoping for the best but fearing the worst. I just want to implore the judges to please show some compassion. Many of the hunters, former neighbours and friends, attended the trial. One of his old minor friends, Barry Kent, even flew in from the UK to come and support him at his trial. On Monday, the 15th of May, 2023, the time finally came for David to stand up and give his evidence. He had to tell every single detail of what happened, and he had to answer all of the prosecution's questions in what must have been one of the most grueling days of his life. David explained how his wife was crying and begging him to end her life, and that how he would never have done it in a million years if she hadn't have asked him to. He eventually decided to grant her wish when she became absolutely hysterical. He then showed the court how he supported her by putting his hands over her nose and over her mouth. David's defense lawyer said that his only motive was to liberate his wife from the suffering that she was enduring. It was Janice's wish to die, and David had only feelings of love for her. Leslie said it was so hard for her to sit and watch her father relive the worst day of his life. So many people stood beside David and hoped for a lesser charge. So many people. I don't think there was a single person who would have agreed that David deserved to be in prison for the rest of his life for premeditated. One of the former neighbours said, we are crossing everything for him. We will be there to support David. We knew them for 3 years, and Janice was ill from the beginning. She got worse and worse every month. They were incredibly happy together. Barbara and David, who also lived in the same village, said, we are praying for him. Everyone is supporting him. We're totally here for him. Everyone is supporting him. We really hope he gets off. The man is no threat to anyone. What benefit is there to keeping him in jail? It just makes no sense. Surely the judge can see that. Owen Williams, a 28-year-old man who was sentenced to prison for arson, spent 18 months with David. He said, David is a wonderful person. I've come to see that over the last 18 months, since I've been his friend. I sincerely hope that I can see my friend and speak to him with both of us free men. I urge the court and everyone involved in making the decision on his future to show compassion and understanding. And Leslie said, I want my dad to come home. I love my dad. I have no doubt that he was helping my mum in the way that she wanted to be helped. They had a good marriage. My dad is a good man, and I want him home because that's what my mum would want and what I want and what we need as a family. My dad isn't a danger to society. My dad has told me what happened, and I have no reason to disbelieve him or to think anything other than he's telling the truth. My mum had made her wishes clear, and my dad helped her. She just wanted it to end. She didn't want to fight. She didn't want treatment. She didn't want a long, protracted death. She'd had enough, and she just wanted to go. On the 21st of July 2023, David Hunter was found not guilty of premeditated and instead found guilty of a lesser charge of manslaughter. Everybody that was following this case felt a huge sense of relief. Following the verdict, Mr. Polak said, a case like this has never been seen in the courts of Cyprus before. We submitted extensive case law from across the common law world, from Australia to Canada, New Zealand and the United Kingdom, to assist the court in coming to a decision which is fair. David would like to thank his legal team for their work, the experts who supported his case, and everyone from Cyprus, the United Kingdom and around the world who supported him. On Monday the 31st of July 2023, he was sentenced to 2 years in prison and was released immediately from the courtroom once the prison authorities calculated his release date. In Cyprus, a defendant will spend 10 months in prison for every year of their sentence. This, along with good behaviour, meant that he was eligible for release immediately. Speaking outside the courtroom immediately following his release, David said, I would like to say thank you to all of the people who donated to me, and especially my mates and workmates. I don't know where I'd be without them. I can't describe how I'm feeling. I wish I could find words to describe it, but I can't. When you're under pressure for 2 years, wondering which way it was going to go, you don't know. In an update on the Crowd Justice fundraising page, Leslie said, I'm sure by now you have all heard the wonderful news that on Monday my lovely daddy was released after 19 months in prison. Monday morning was a bit of a whirlwind as news trickled in from the court. First, I heard that he received a 2-year sentence and was left wondering if that included time served. Then I heard he would be released in December, only to then hear that he would be released on the 18th of August. Minutes later, my phone rang with a call from our barrister, and there, on FaceTime, was my dad. I really can't find the words to describe that moment. We were only able to arrive at because of all of you. Friends and strangers alike, you have reached out to us in the darkest of times and kept us afloat with your kindness and generosity. You brought my dad back to me, and a mere thank you will never be enough. My dad is doing okay. He's frail, tired and a bit disorientated, but so happy and relieved. He knows he wouldn't be free without all of you, and he is so very grateful. We're getting closer to being able to cover his outstanding legal bills, which is a huge relief, but the fight isn't over. We need to make sure that no other family has to face this kind of nightmare, so please keep sharing our story. With all our love and thanks, Leslie and David. Mr. Polak said that David was extremely happy to be released. He said he was facing a charge which would have meant he would die in a prison in Cyprus. He has been in prison for some time. He's okay. He's looking forward to getting on with the grieving process, visiting Janice's grave. Janice was buried in a cemetery just minutes from the couple's former home, but obviously because David was sent to prison, he's never actually had the opportunity to go and visit her grave. So the day after his release, he finally got the opportunity to go and visit his wife's grave. At first he couldn't find it, so Mr. Polak had to actually guide him there. He was carrying a beautiful bouquet of pink, yellow and purple flowers. He dropped to his knees at the grave, laid down the flowers. He was visibly shaking and upset sitting at the grave, and he stayed there for around half an hour before he left again. Following his release, David decided to stay in Cyprus so that he could be closer to his wife rather than going back to the UK, and he bought a house just around the corner from where she's buried. The neighbours all welcomed him back to Tremathalsa with open arms. They were all so pleased that he was free. Then, in an extremely shocking turn of events, the Cypriot Attorney General, at the very last moment, put in an appeal against the decision to free David. The Cypriot prosecutors only have 10 days to file in an appeal, and they put in this appeal on the 10th of August 2023, which would have been the very last day that they were able to file this appeal. Mr. Polak responded by saying, "We thought that David's ordeal in Cyprus was over last week when he was released from court with a 2-year sentence. Now we need to continue fighting the case for him on both his acquittal for premeditated murder and the sentence for manslaughter. We are obviously very disappointed at the Attorney General's decision to appeal today, which gets in the way of David getting on with his life. He has spent 19 months in prison and faced legal proceedings over that period. That would be difficult for anybody, but especially someone of his age." Leslie also said in another update on the Crowd Justice fundraiser page, "Many of you may have heard by now that the Cypriot Attorney General has appealed my dad's acquittal on the charge of premeditated and the sentence. The worst case scenario is that Dad will now be found guilty of premeditated murder, given a life sentence and returned to prison. The Attorney General had 10 days to appeal, and he did this at the 11th hour, which seems particularly cruel and has devastated our family. We now face a lengthy appeal process, the very last thing we need when our emotional and financial resources are utterly depleted. I hate to ask again, but I would be grateful if you could continue to share our story and to help with the ongoing fight to preserve Dad's hard-won liberty. With love and thanks as always, Leslie." Mr. Polak explained that the prosecution have now been given 2 months to make their case, at which point the defence have 2 months to make their case. An appeal hearing will then take place in either April or May of this year, 2024. Mr. Polak said, "When the Assize Court of Paphos finally found David not guilty of murder in July and sentenced him to manslaughter, resulting in his immediate release, we thought that the legal proceedings were over for him. For anyone, but especially someone of David's age, it is obviously very stressful to have the possibility of being sent back to prison for life hanging over their head. Although we are very disappointed in the decision to pursue David further, we will continue to fight for David, and we thank everyone from Cyprus, the United Kingdom, and around the world who have been supporting him so strongly." I'm going to try and leave a link to the Crowd Justice fundraising page, because if any of you feel compelled to donate to the case, then please do, because it really seems like they could use all the help they can get. Thank you for watching this video. If you have a story that you would like to share or something you'd like me to talk about, you can contact me via my email, which I'll leave linked in the description box down below, or you can comment on this video and I will do my best to get back to you. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. It's a free and easy way that you can support this channel. And until next time, please remember to be kind to everybody around you, because you never know what someone else might be going through, and a little bit of kindness and compassion can go a long way. Bye bye for now.